to the Thought Snob Podcast. I'm Paula Swope. Let's get snobby. I'm going to keep it real here. Every conversation I have doesn't have a profound impact on me. This one did. I walked away from it thinking critically about things I hadn't thought about in a while. Today's guest is Amber Wardell. Dr. Amber Wardell is a cognitive psychologist, Psychology Today contributor, and internet personality. On TikTok and Instagram, she is Sensible Amber. After spending over an hour with her, I can't think of a better way to describe Amber. She is undoubtedly one of the most sensible human beings I've talked to. Her book, Beyond Self-Care Potato Chips, Choosing Nourishing Self-Care in a Quick Fix Culture, offers actionable advice with examples of realistic and fulfilling self-care practices. She, too, shares her personal story of learning to love herself again and how the practical steps she took to get there that can serve as a roadmap for others. This podcast episode is for every woman and man. Like, gentlemen, if you want to learn more about women, here's your opportunity. Every single statement Amber said to me had meaning and was the result of years of her experiences and deep insight into what it takes to live the best life possible and what that best life means to you personally. Her advice at the end of our conversation is nothing short of badass. So without further ado, Amber Wardell. All right, so you're a type A Capricorn. So am I. How's that worked out for you?
Pretty good, I gotta say.
Yeah.
Pretty good.
Yeah, sometimes I wonder if it's a blessing or a curse. But I think I have to go with blessing.
Yeah, I think that the job is trying to learn how to control it. And once you learn how to control it, then it becomes the blessing. But when you're letting it control you, then it's the curse.
That's right. That's right. And there have been times when I didn't have the awareness, that I have now, and didn't realize what was happening, and that it was in control of me and I wasn't in control. So yeah, you're exactly right. And so I have not totally finished your book. I have made my way, a pretty good chunk of it. Beyond Self-Care, Potato Chips, Choosing Nourishing Self-Care in a Quick Fix Culture. I absolutely love it. And I love the fact that, you just tell it like it is. You're like me. I don't know if you've always been willing to be that vulnerable. I know I haven't always been willing to be that vulnerable, but I knew when I stepped into this line of work that I had to be because it would help people.
Mm-hmm.
And there's so many places where we could begin, but if it's okay with you, I would just kind of like to talk about what you state about self-care and how it goes beyond anything superficial, and it's not any kind of an easy fix. And I couldn't agree more, and I'll get into why I agree with that so much in a minute. But I would just like for you to talk about what you mean by toxic self-care culture.
Sure. So it's funny, I was just on another podcast earlier this week, and I was talking about how I sometimes grit my teeth a little at that part at my phrasing in the book, because as you know, when you're publishing a book, by the time it comes out, you've written it 1, maybe 2 years ago, and hopefully you've evolved in that time, like you've been working on yourself and whatnot. And I was saying on that podcast, I was like, oh, sometimes I regret calling it toxic self-care culture because maybe it's not that, maybe it's this and that. And then that very same day, I saw an example on TikTok of the very thing, like the very toxic self-care culture that I talk about in the book. And so is it okay if I give this example of the video that I saw?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so it was this video of a young woman and her young husband, and it was New Year's Eve, and they had taped. Have you seen any of the videos where parents were taping balloons up to the ceiling?
Yeah.
They were doing a balloon drop for their kids on New Year's Eve.
Mm-hmm.
Well, so this young couple, like, she wanted to have this Instagram moment where they pull the sheet down and the balloons fall, and she has this Instagram moment of her and her husband, and the balloons didn't fall properly. And she filmed the whole thing, and she shows it back to her audience, and she's, like, narrating how, "Here's my husband being so nervous and afraid that he's gonna let me down, that I'm gonna be disappointed in the balloons, and now here's the moment where the balloons fall, and you can see how angry I am and disappointed in him that it didn't turn out great, and now here I am, he's trying to embrace me, and I push him away because 'cause I'm mad." And then she, like, narrates, and she starts talking about how, sometimes it's just really important that we be our authentic selves. And authenticity means just being with whatever feeling that you're feeling in that moment. And so I shoved him away and I said, I'll just deal with this feeling later. And this poor girl got tore up in her comment section because, rightly so, people were like, wait a minute. That was completely uncalled for. The way you were treating your husband in this moment was cruel and hurtful and disproportionate to what had just happened. And what she was doing was trying to position herself as a relationship coach, as a self-care coach, and trying to tell you, like, this is how it's okay to be. And these are the kind of things that I talk about in the book as being toxic self-care culture, how kind of social media has made it so that anyone can come to the internet and claim to be an authority on this topic
Mhm.
and give you advice that is not necessarily useful and is potentially harmful to you and to your relationships. And that is such a perfect example of that, where it's like there is this toxic self-care mindset, which is that I'm just allowed to be however I want to be, no matter how toxic or narcissistic or messy or inconsiderate or selfish. And, like, that's okay because I'm doing self-care. And so my book is, on the one hand, acknowledging that, like, yes, there's an element to that. There's an element to being unapologetically you and being authentic at all times. But there's also another side of it, which has to include conflict resolution and concern for other people's feelings and meeting in the middle and things like that. And so that's part of the toxic self-care culture. And the other side of it, of course, is the one that tells us self-care is all about just taking bubble baths and doing face masks. And that's, of course, never going to actually give us the kind of self-care we need either. We need to be doing the hard work of setting boundaries and speaking our needs and all of those kinds of things.
It's funny that you say when you wrote your book, you were in like a different place than you are now. I struggle with that a lot too, because social media has turned a lot of metaphysical concepts into something gimmicky and trendy. That word
Mhm.
manifestation has turned into something completely gimmicky. And so I kind of cringe when I use that word, although sometimes I have to. I prefer to use, like, conscious creation, but not everybody understands what that means, but they'll know manifestation. And so I totally get where you're coming from on that. And with self-care, I have to point out that, I grew up in an area. Most of my work is geared towards underprivileged populations. I grew up in an area that was heavily impacted by poverty. And
Mm.
I refer to it as a, poverty invaded mindset. Nobody ever said anything to us about self-care, period. Those words were not used.
Yeah.
And when I got into, I was probably in my mid to late 20s, may have been the first time that I even thought about self-care or even used that term. And it was pitched to me as, oh, well, go to a spa and have an expensive facial and a massage, and that's self-care.
Mhm.
Well, I was in such bad shape energetically and emotionally, and I had so much emotional trauma, and I didn't even freaking know it. And I would go to some expensive spa and rack up a big bill on my credit card and then have a oh shit moment when I got into my car thinking, well, how in the hell am I going to pay for this? And it just caused the anxiety to spiral. And then I,
Mhm.
felt all this guilt and regret. And so going to the spa didn't do me much good. Now, in this day and time, it's just part of my routine with trying to keep my skin in good shape in the middle of freaking menopause. But everybody's got it all jacked up with the true meaning of self-care. More than likely, that expensive facial isn't going to do too much for you in the long run. But those consistent practices with meditation and breath work and saying no and setting boundaries, that's the part of the healing process. I mean, to me, that's self-care. Not being
Yeah.
perfect,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah, and I talk about that in the preface of the book. I wish I had made the preface chapter 1 because I think, as you know, so often people skip right over the preface, and I think that things I talk about in the preface are so important for establishing some important truths for the book. But one of the things that I talk about is the way we talk about self-care is in a way that primarily avails itself only to the most privileged among us,
Mhm.
because it's things like that, going to a spa and getting your Botox and your chemical peels and like all of these things that you really can't have access to unless you're very wealthy. Even things like therapy aren't accessible to some people, right?
Right.
And so what I talk about in the book is that there are some types of self-care that are accessible to us all because they're internal processes. And those are things like connecting with our inner child, setting boundaries, getting to know our own worth and value and things like that. And so that's when I do like the parts where I don't cringe at my use of like toxic self-care culture. That's definitely the part that I am like, yes, yes, we do have to push back against that. Like trying to say that like, oh yes, go spend all of this money that's going to make you feel anxious later. For most of us, that's not actually going to be the self-care that does anything for us.
No. No, a facial, there's no injectable, there's nothing that could have fixed me, back in the day. It took a whole lot more than anything that money could buy. And your comment about therapy, in a state like Kentucky, the lack of access to health care is disgraceful. There aren't
Mhm.
even enough mental health care professionals to cater to serve as many people that need it. And that's a pretty big problem here in the state of Kentucky and in a lot of rural areas. And another thing too, people are embarrassed. They are embarrassed to see a therapist or to admit that they have some type of a mental health issue. It's like just still a little taboo. And I just wish that it would be normalized like head colds are. You don't think a thing about going to the little clinic if you got the sniffles.
Mhm.
It's like there's more than one way to not feel well. Um, and I think you do a really great job of pointing just, I don't know, normalizing it in your book. I mean, it's very human. And you really get down to the nitty-gritty of like every aspect of life. And you just do it like right off the bat.
Well,
And
thank you.
yeah, yeah. And when it comes to relationships, you mentioned Abraham Maslow's hierarchy in your book.
Mhm.
And where I grew up, people really never reach that top level of self actualization as defined by Maslow. They just don't.
Mhm.
And I think overall have a lesser chance because their basic needs aren't met. I mean, they stay in survival mode. And that's where I was for the longest time. And until I got closer to that level of self actualization, none of my relationships worked. And I'm talking about all of them, not just intimate relationships. I'm talking about platonic, any relationship that I had, personal, professional, whatever. But when I got a little bit closer to that, my relationships made more sense and I found myself around different people. And as I
Mhm.
read through your book, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I feel like that you really started moving up that hierarchy when you and your husband separated. Do you think that's what
Yeah.
it took?
In our case, yes, absolutely. And I think that, I mean, that was for a number of reasons. I try to be really careful when I talk about this because, you know, I never want to make it sound like I think our approach was the right way for anyone else.
Mhm.
This was just what we needed, but we had, but between, we had, exes that we had to deal with. We had chronic illness in our marriage that really took a toll. We had financial troubles, just a lot of things that became concomitant issues that really, really affected our marriage. And when you have that many different things assaulting your relationship all at once, it becomes too much. And I remember sitting down with my therapist after like a year of weekly therapy with him, trying to figure out what to do about my mental health and my relationship. And my therapist said, "You can't heal where you were broken." And it just stopped me dead in my tracks. I was like, "Oh my God." And so that was when I decided I moved out. People always ask me, like, what do you mean you moved out?" It's usually not the woman who moves out of the house. But I told Charlie, I said, "I can't be in this house anymore. I need to go and heal elsewhere." So I got an apartment. My husband and I separated our children 50-50. So like I enjoyed them for 1 week and then he enjoyed them for another week. And that was a whole other process, which we don't have to get into. But it was in that time, in that apartment, when I had my weeks off from the kids, when I was able to just for the first time be alone and really think about what is it that I need and what I want. And to really examine some wounds that I had that maybe just it's kinda like what you mentioned, when you're in survival mode, who is examining, like, their inner child's wounding when they're just trying to make sure that they have food on the table and that, like, their children are thriving? Like, you can't do those things, and so it was really the first opportunity that I had to really look at myself, and I think one of the biggest things for me was that I was in this high conflict marriage where things were really falling apart. And it's so easy when you're in a high conflict relationship to just be constantly looking at your partner and being like, this is where you are making my life hell. I hate all of this. I hate what you're doing to my life and whatever. There's all this blame throwing. And then when I got alone and there was no longer anyone else to point the finger at except for myself, then I had to really start contending with all the ways that I was the toxic one, all the ways that I was creating problems for myself. And that's really the only way that you can ultimately fix and heal yourself, is to go, all right, I've cleared everyone else out of the room and I'm still unhappy.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
it's got to be me.
Mhm.
Guess it's time I fix some of this shit,
Mhm.
like, so yeah, I think that was a big part of it.
I think being alone is absolutely necessary. I got married later in life. I didn't get married until I was 38. And I was alone for a really, really long time. And I did that deliberately for a while, but in the beginning, it was kind of like a forced thing, but ended up being possibly the best thing I've ever done for myself because I didn't have anybody telling me who I was. I didn't have to answer to anybody. And I got to the point that I didn't feel lonely anymore. I actually enjoyed my own company. And I think that when I got to that point, it was like a pivotal moment. It was almost like a lot of the healing had been done. Did you feel that way when you were alone in your apartment?
I did,
Yeah.
yeah, I did.
Mhm.
And it's funny, we talk about the relationship escalator that it happens to men and women, but it especially happens to women where we start telling women at age 21, "Oh, oh, it's time to start looking for a man, time to start getting married." And, if by 24, if you don't have a serious prospect for a husband, well, what's wrong with you? You may have seen Taylor Swift just turned 35, and there was this article that went viral that was like, Taylor Swift is crashing out because she's 35 and doesn't have a husband. And it's like, says who?
Right.
Says who? She's one of the most successful women in the world.
Mhm.
But we're told that our value comes from having a mate. And again, men get this as well. But I think for women, it's so much more so because for us, our value comes from a man telling us that we have value in the first place. And so we go through that really difficult time of, if we're 24 and unmarried, well, now we're an old hag and we're unlovable and unlikable and all these things. And it couldn't be further from the truth.
Mm-hmm.
But having to go through that process and really realize, well, now wait a minute. I think I'm pretty great.
Mm-hmm.
I think I'm actually pretty okay by myself. And I think I'm pretty worthy on my own without anyone co-signing on that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think it takes a special kind of man to find a woman who has found the ability to love herself like that. I think many, many men are intimidated by women who love themselves that way.
Oh, they are, because women like that can't be controlled.
Nope.
It's impossible to control a woman like that. And
Yes.
usually, and I mean, speak from experience here, and most women that I know who have gotten to that level of self-actualization at some point, they have been controlled. They have been submissive. They have behaved like a low-maintenance woman, or whatever you want to call it. You refer to these types of women in your book as these strong women, as dangerous women. And I have called them, high maintenance women. And from my perspective, like, that's a really good thing. And, the dangerous women in your book, that's a really good thing. But women get judged more than men. We just do. And as time goes on, I mean, I think that it's gotten a little bit better, but it's still there. And I want to point out what you say on page 13. We teach our little girls that love is enough, but research on human motivation and needs tells us a much different story. And what I said a minute just earlier, I realized several years ago that until I got right with myself, that none of my relationships were going to work. But they don't teach us that. It's like the Disney movies. It's like, oh, well, everything's okay now that the prince has shown up.
That's right.
Well, that prince has got freaking trauma too. And that prince has got his own shit too. And
That's right.
yeah.
That's why I say at the beginning of that same chapter, the beginning of that chapter is I often think about how strange it is that most of the love stories we see as little girls end at what's actually the beginning. Cinderella marries the prince while her wicked stepsisters watch in dismay, and the newly betrothed couple lives happily ever after. Belle and Ariel and Briar Rose and an unending list of broken girls find the man who will fix them, and they live happily ever God-forsaken after. The end.
Yes.
And it's like, what? It's like,
Mm-hmm.
what? How is this the end? This is the beginning. Like, I just hate that narrative that like, oh, good, you found your man.
Mm-hmm.
All done.
Right.
Everything's
gonna be okay now. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, people change.
Mm-hmm.
And there, things like hormones and kids and stepkids and jobs and money and health and we're just not really shown that during the ages, I think, when we're most just influenced by everything we take in, we see, we hear, we smell. We're so influenced by that when we're little. And it's like, I call it butterfly love. It's like that, the teenage love thing kind of sets us up for disappointment because, real true love isn't like that. It's not like that at all. And when you're with somebody for, several years, you change, your relationship changes, your needs change. And the one reason I've enjoyed your book so much so far is because it's real talk about expressing our needs to men, and where the way that I was socialized to believe that if I did that, the dude wouldn't like me anymore, that I would come across as needy, crazy bitch, naggy. And really, if you're not assertive and direct with men, you really don't get anywhere. It's like when you were talking about the Christmas tree. And then you said passive immobility. I did not know there was a psychological term for that, but God almighty, me and every other woman on the planet that I know has been guilty of doing that, expecting the men to read our minds, and they can't do it.
Yeah. And this is what blows my mind. Tell me if this has been your experience too, right?
Mm-hmm.
This is why I speak so often about the ills of patriarchy. And I get frustrated when I see men who won't stand against patriarchy with us, because if men would really look, they would see that patriarchy is really not doing them any favors either. And this is an example of it as well, because even men don't want us to not speak our needs. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Like when I began, and I'm still working on this, I'm just gonna be so real. I still really, really struggle. And I talk about this in the book, like, because we've been socialized to believe that the pinnacle of romance is having a partner who knows us so well that they can anticipate our needs. I still really struggle with not telling my husband when there is a win here. When, like, if my husband, I really wanted this, like, Minnie Mouse Quirksicle cup, right? Like, I could have told him that I wanted this for my birthday, and he could have gotten it for me, and, like, totally that would have been such a win. But instead I, like, don't tell him and hope that somehow he'll just, like, poof this into his own mind, and then, like, I don't get it for my birthday, and then I'm like, "Oh, why didn't he know that I wanted that?" So we all struggle with this, right? But I'm learning that when I articulate things to my husband, when I just say, "Hey, when you go into the kitchen, can you start the dishwasher?" Or, "Hey, will you carry the laundry in there and will you start the laundry?" He loves that. He loves that. He would so much rather me just communicate that to him.
Mm-hmm.
But men have somehow been told that they don't like it when we ask them for help and when we tell them what we need. And just like we do, they internalize that messaging and they believe it. And they're like, yeah, it's naggy when you tell me to please go start the laundry. But isn't it your experience that they're not actually like that? They much, much, much prefer it when we just tell them what we need?
Oh my God, yeah. There was a time when, and this was the first few years of our marriage, and Will is sitting right back here hearing every word that I'm saying. I would get frustrated to the point that it would turn into rage over household chores. And this was more so in the beginning. But trash cans overflowing, toilets just nasty, and all this stuff. And I played games, and I would think, I can't be the only person that sees this. He has to see this. And I would think he doesn't want to live in filth. Nobody wants to live in filth. Well, that was my freaking opinion and my expectation. And so I would let it build. And then by the time I said something, I came across as a total asshole, and it turned into a fight because
Mm-hmm.
I was really condescending about it, and just like I just came across just like as and Will just does not respond well to that at all. And then I would let it go to the point that it was just awful, and nothing happened with that either. Then I would get madder, and then it would, a bigger argument, more tension. And I just started saying, listen, I have got to have some help. And when I started saying that, Will's like, make me a list. And if I make him a list, he will do everything on that list. And I think that it did make him feel better because there wasn't as many arguments, and the tension was gone. Did he want to spend his day doing household chores? Oh God, no. But he did it.
Mm-hmm.
And it wasn't an issue. And I wasn't so tired and exhausted that I could go on about my business, and I was in a better mood, and everybody was in a better mood.
Yeah.
So that's been my experience, like up until now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because this is so, like, just really quickly, and the only reason I bring this up is because this is right aligned with what I do on my podcast. My podcast is called The Sensible Sessions,
Mhm.
bringing a sensible approach to a world that's lost its mind. And what I'm trying to do is rein in conversations where it feels like maybe we have taken conversations that need to happen and we've pulled those conversations to an extreme place because we had to, because there was resistance to them, but now they're in an absurd place and we need to bring them back a little bit. And the shared division of household labor conversation is one that, in my opinion, has in some ways gone to an absurd place. And I'm going to explain why. So when Charlie and I were having all of our problems in our marriage, I was just getting onto TikTok. This was like during the COVID-19, like when everything was really bad. And I came across a lot of content that was about equal division of labor.
Mhm.
And it was talking about how equal division of labor is 50-50. Husbands and wives need to split all of the household labor 50-50, 100%. And I was like, yeah, that's exactly what we need to do. Okay. And so I started talking to Charlie about that. My husband has ADHD. And so he says, okay, yeah, I will do that. Yes, make me a list. And I was like, all right, yeah, let me start making you lists. Well, then I stumble across TikTok videos that are like talking about the mental load and the mental labor of having to make a man a list. That this is men are asking too much labor from women to make them lists. And I'm not trying to invalidate any other woman's experience, but in my household, married to a man who has ADHD, there's really no way to ask my husband for help with things without making him a list, because he's going to forget. And I'm going to get my feelings hurt because I'm going to think he doesn't care. It's not that he doesn't care, it's that he has ADHD. So we spent a whole year fighting over fucking lists because I was listening to people on TikTok telling me that in my marriage, there was absolutely no reason why I should be making lists, right? So here I am with a husband who works at a corporate job where he has like a boss and things and deadlines and whatnot. I'm self-employed, so I have a completely flexible schedule. He has ADHD. I'm neurotypical. And here I am demanding 50-50 division of the labor and insisting that I absolutely should not have to make a list for him. And I talk about this in the book, the chapter called Honeydew List. One day it finally occurred to me that this is absurd. This is actually not useful in my household. It does not matter if this is useful in anyone else's household. This is not good for mine. And so what we had to switch to was looking for equitable division of labor. And equitable, as I know you know, but for any of your listeners, like equitable division of labor is taking into account each person's external responsibilities when we're looking at how much we're going to divide up the household chores. So for me and my husband, we realized that what's comfortable and good for us, what feels equitable for us, is that I take on about 70% of the household labor and he takes on about 30%. Because that fits with our outside stuff.
Sure.
And also, if I have things that I really need him to do, I will make him a list because he has ADHD.
Right.
And I don't want to be disappointed and let down. I don't want to be made to feel like he didn't listen or that he doesn't care. And sometimes I have to send him an email. Like sometimes that's the best way to communicate with my husband. But like, I think it's sometimes we're way too quick to look at how other people are managing their relationships. And there are people who will say things so confidently and so authoritatively, and we will say like, okay, that's how that should be in my relationship. And we try to do it and it backfires. And then we feel like failures. And it turns out like that may actually be an absurd way for me to be trying to do that in my own relationship, you know?
Mm-hmm. I know exactly what you mean. And social media, I am so over it. And it's served a great purpose for me in my career, and it will continue to serve a great purpose. But at this point, it's so much bullshit, and I've been really over it for quite some time. And and it hasn't bothered me in this way, but I know a lot of people that it has. Those comparisons are killing people. Comparing relationships and trying to do what everybody else is doing and self-diagnosing, and it gets to the point that I'm like, this is absolutely out of control." And you're right, what works for one couple won't work for the other. It's not black and white. It's just not. And that's why over the past few years, I don't solicit advice from other people, and I don't take it. If somebody just gives me advice, then I'll think about it and be grateful for it and figure out if it's good for me. Did I hear that for a reason, or was it just their ego? I'm just very, very aware, and that's what works. That's what works for me. And with the list with Will, my husband, he has ADHD too. Um, I don't make lists really anymore. It was just getting into the habit of helping more and just being more aware of, what's going on. And that seemed to work in this household, but it's definitely not 50-50 here either, and it's because of the schedules.
Mhm.
But he has his, responsibilities that are different than mine. It's just we had to start really talking about it and just being honest about it, because I remember a few years ago setting him down and saying, "I'm going to lose my mind if somebody doesn't start helping me around this house." Like, I remember saying that. And at the time, I've been self-employed since 2015. And I've had a good, lot of flexibility in my schedule. But at that time, I was working 60 hours a week. I mean, I had a lot on my shoulders. And I think that was when I really did feel like I was going to lose my mind. And when you get to that point, it really just trickles down, and it just infiltrates just everything in the
Mhm.
household. And I knew that I couldn't stand that heaviness, and that's what got me to that point. But making the list, that was one way that we started to move out of that hole,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, the social media thing, I could talk about that forever.
Oh
I'm
God,
I'm I'm with you. I'm so over it. I've just been thinking the whole time we've been talking about the household labor stuff. I'm like, "Oh, we're gonna get torn up in the comments just because we're using the word help." I had a video
probably.
I I had a video where I was talking about how my husband shows up in the house, and I used the word help, and the video went viral because everyone was scolding me for saying that my husband helped. He's not helping. He lives there too. And I'm like, "Listen, most of these things in this house are my responsibility. He and I have agreed to that, right? So we agree that these things are my task. If he participates in these tasks that we've agreed are mine, then yes, he is helping me. And I cannot believe that I'm going viral in a bad way because I referred to my husband in a way that you personally don't like. That this doesn't affect you at all."
Mhm.
It's just but it's like that's what it's become. Posting to social media now feels like trying to think of every possible bit of nuance to consider so that someone doesn't take your words and twist them into something that you didn't say, and then trying to force you to defend the thing you didn't say that they've made up. It's just it's crazy.
It's crazy, and I could not have handled it. I did not have the level of emotional intelligence, say, 20 years ago that I do now. 20 years ago, I don't know what it would have done to me. I would not have been able to have handled what I handle now. Now,
Mm-mm.
anything that anybody says, it does not get to me in the least bit. Listen, there was a whole conversation on one of my videos the other day, and there were hundreds of comments, and they were going back and forth trying to figure out if I was AI. I swear. And I I don't think I even chimed in. Like, I was just reading it going, you have got to be kidding me.
Wait, what platform was this
I
on?
think it was TikTok.
I have to go find it now. I'll find it after we're done recording. That is too.
Yeah, and I'm pretty sure it was on, and I'll find it. If you can't find it, I'll find it, and I'll send it to you. It was hysterical. I think it was on the video that I did, the first video I did about high maintenance women. And I was using, this is I think it was maybe a couple of years ago or maybe early 2023 when I posted that video. But I was using a new app, and I'm just not great with technology. And I don't like to use a lot of filters. Like, when people see me, I want them to know it's me and not this like totally polished version. But on this video, I did the video and realized that that filter was like turned up to 100%. And so I looked kind of Disney-like, and I was like, damn it, I don't want to redo this. And I just posted it. Well, video took off. It did well. But then as the months went by, somebody said AI, and I think that's what started it. And they were going back and forth if I was a bot. And then I think that's the same video that people were trying to guess my age. And
Isn't
somebody,
that fun?
oh yeah, and it went from 20s to 60s. I think the highest number was like 67 or something. I was like, this is insane. This is crazy. And it's gotten crazier as time has gone on.
It really has. And you know, I've been talking about this with some of my friends lately. The only solace that I take from any of this, and this is going to sound like I'm talking about politics. I'm not. But whenever you talk about polarities, people instantly think politics. This is not political. I mean, if you just look at any topic, we have extremes. And I think social media has in every way forced people into extremes on like every topic. You can say, I like the taste of water, and it will push people into polarities of like, water is the most disgusting taste on the planet and water is the most delicious thing on the planet. Like, it's just crazy how social media does that. And I think what's happening is that these extreme polarities of like freaking everything that gets talked about on social media is waking people up, and people are going, I'm so tired of living in these poles, that people are starting to just come back into this kind of central place. A lot of people are finding neutrality and finding common ground again, and are saying like, hey, could we just like not do all this? Like, this is the most. This is so much. Like, maybe we could just find ways that we're like in agreement on things. Maybe we could just find ways to have conversations that are like fun to have. I'm heartened by that. I'm also heartened by the fact that I'm seeing more and more people. You know, for a while everyone was saying like, touch grass, go touch grass, and it was this like, it was an insult. It was a way to tell people like, you're chronically online, go outside and touch grass. But now people are actually doing it. Like, I'm seeing people being like, I'm logging off. I'm taking a big step back from social media, and people are prioritizing their in-person relationships again. And I'm so glad. I think, speaking of self-care, like, I think it's really important that a lot of us start putting some boundaries around our social media lives, having some social media hygiene, some rules around how we engage with social media, because especially speaking of AI, especially with how many bots are infiltrating social media now. I made a just
Oh, yeah.
Paula, I'm ashamed to admit this, but like, one of my New Year's resolutions was like, I will no longer argue with people on the internet anymore, because I'm reasonably certain that half the time I am arguing with a bot. And
Oh, no doubt.
that makes me feel so stupid. I feel really stupid. If I'm sitting here arguing with a bot, that is the lowest of the low. Like, of all low IQ behaviors I could be doing, that's one of them. Like, I just don't want to be doing that,
I'm telling
you
you.
know?
And I'm sure that a lot of people are going to go off when I make this comment. And it's not, I don't mean it politically either, but X is like infamous for bots.
Is it?
Yes, it's the most unbelievable thing. And a lot of I'm not active on there for that reason. It's totally, completely biased. And that's where I have seen the most bots. And
Mhm.
I sometimes have a hard time distinguishing between, what's real and what isn't. And when I realized I was at that point, I thought, okay, I'm going to take a step back from this. This is getting a little too much, because it got to the point I couldn't believe it. If I saw a video or a picture, I couldn't tell if it was AI or if it was actually real. And it's actually to the point I feel like that I can't believe most of what I see here. It's crazy. It's crazy. And
Yeah.
I remember when I was just blown away when Photoshop, first kind of, I mean, when I was little, we got the caller ID, and I mean, we would be running down that hallway just to see who was calling, and that was just like such a big deal. And I remember my family thinking it's the mark of the beast, and I'm like, we've come a long way, baby, because it is way, way far gone at this point. But when I go, that's what really got me with social media. I was on it too much because I was promoting my book. I felt like I had to.
Mhm.
And it's like I was feeding the beast, just feeding the beast. But then with the whole bot thing and AI, and I'm like, I don't have time to sit here and to even try to figure out if this is real or fake. So I completely understand where you're coming from with that. No, we can't waste our time arguing with a bot.
I know. And it's not even much better when it's real people, 'cause, then I'm like, "What am I doing? Arguing with some asshole." Like, if
Mm-hmm.
this is a real person, I don't know, maybe that's even worse. So, now for the most part, I mostly post and ghost. I have a scheduler where, like, I make my content and then I schedule it. It posts it literally on every platform I know of, and it just posts it. And, I had a guest on my podcast the other day who said that her rule is that for 24 hours, she will read the comments on her posts. She bypasses her notifications altogether. And so for 24 hours, she will engage with just the good faith commenters on her videos. And then after that, she doesn't go back. And I've been doing that since then. And my mental health has been so much better.
Mm-hmm.
So much better. It
Oh,
is none of
yeah.
my business. If someone is acting a fool in my video from 2 months ago, none of my business.
Right.
I don't even know who that girl was 2 months ago. I don't know what she cared about 2 months ago. Like,
Right. Right. And I've found that I really have to be aware when I'm live, like when I go live, and because people will storm the room and just
Mhm.
say the most outlandish stuff. And I know they're doing it on purpose. It's to try and get a rise out of you. That's why I'm saying 20 years ago, I would have been able to have handled it. I would have been fighting. I would have given them exactly what they wanted. Now I would have probably been mega famous because of the way that I would have acted. But in this day and time, I don't even have a desire to do that. And even for me to even think about that, I'm like, I don't have time. I don't have time for this shit. And I've taken a step back. I mean, I've continued to keep my content up and post and stuff, but I'm not interacting with people like I did because it wasn't getting me anywhere.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, I think that's a really important difference, is like, I think for many years I was seeing social media as like, I think it goes back to what we were talking about in the pre-show about, being a type A Capricorn, and is it a blessing or a curse? Well, it really comes down to, are you in control of it, or is it controlling you? And I feel like it was the same with social media. I feel like it reached a place where it was the what's the expression? The tail wagging the dog.
mm-hmm,
Like, social media had me by the horns instead of the other way around. And so I've been taking back control over my experience on social media, and that's been really good.
Yeah, the social media thing is just it's served its purpose, like I said before, and it will continue to serve its purpose, but I'm looking at it differently.
Yeah,
for sure.
absolutely.
Yeah. And it goes totally in sync with self-care potato chips, because really truly there's a time and a place for everything, right? I mean, you say that in the book, there's time and a place for everything. There's a time when if you want to sit down and you want to binge eat some potato chips, sure, to do it. All right. But it's like when you do it every day, that's when it becomes a problem. And that's how I was feeling with social media. Like I was just sitting around just eating like a bag of potato chips every single day. That's what it started to feel like.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I know I've kept you for an hour. And so you talk about, I want to close with this because I know so many women are going to be listening. And so I never had any biological children of my own. And as I read through your book and I learned about what you went through with raising your kids and like the sleep problems that they had when they were babies, and you were basically like sleep deprived and trying to, just keep your head above water. And I remember thinking, because I had sleep problems when I was a baby and my mother was just basically completely screwed because of that. And I was just thinking, that reiterated how I have felt my whole life, because I never had my kids of my own because I knew I wasn't cut out for it. It was just one of those things. I just knew I wasn't cut out for it. I knew that I couldn't handle it. And so women that are trying to keep their head above water and they're raising kids and they don't have sleep, and maybe their marriage is strained and it's just stress. What is do you have anything that you would like to say to those women so that they aren't just keeping their head above water? It's like, what is did you do anything self-care wise that kind of helped to pull you out of that?
The truth is that time of your life is very, very hard. And it goes back to what we talked about at the top of the show when you're in survival mode, that it's just a time of your life where there's just not room in your life for much self-care. And so the only thing that I try to remind new moms who are going through that, I'm getting emotional, is that your turn is coming, that it's your turn in the shit right now. It's your turn. But your turn for happiness and joy is coming, and there will be a time when you feel like yourself again. There will be a time where you get to shower as long as you want to. There will be a time when you get to sleep all night long. And there will be a time and I think also you don't have to love and enjoy and appreciate this time of your life. There are so many women who I think are well-meaning. I can't be sure, but I think they're well-meaning, who say these things like, well, soak it all in, appreciate it because it goes by so fast. And I want to stick a boot up those women's asses when they say that stuff, because you can't enjoy something that feels like torture. And sleep deprivation is a method of torture. Like it's and and I will say that I also was someone who always knew I wasn't cut out for parenthood. But I knew I wanted to have adult children, and in order to get adult children, if you want them to be biological, you have to have baby children first. And so I did that, and I did not enjoy most of their infancy. It was very, very hard for me. I had postpartum depression. I had all that stuff.
Right.
And I don't miss that time of their lives. I don't romanticize that time of my life. I don't look back on it and wish I could go back to it. All I know is that life gets better and easier every day with every new milestone. I still, when I talk about that, get possibly well-meaning women who say, well, just wait, big kids, big problems. And to that, I say, you know what, maybe for you, for me, the kids are getting bigger and their problems are getting bigger, but I am more capable of dealing with anything they're throwing at me these days than I was when they were infants. And I believe that's going to follow through even into their teenage years and adulthoods. And we're allowed to celebrate that. Like I can handle that kind of stuff so much better. And so I think women should just be allowed to tell themselves that, hey, I might just not be a very good baby mom, but I'm probably going to be an awesome teenager mom or, grown up mom. And I'll leave it at this. I had a friend who told me one time, she said, God has a way of making things fair. So, if you have the kid that doesn't sleep, you'll probably end up with the kid who's like so easy to potty train. Or if you have the kid who's a nightmare to potty train, you'll probably have the kid who's a really good eater, like things. And it's been true. Like neither of my kids ever had a single bathroom accident. Never wet the bed. Not once.
Wow.
Never had an accident out in public. Never. Potty training them. They were done in 3 days. Potty training. So things balance out.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the best advice that you could have possibly given anybody. And I never had any kids of my own, but I have 2 stepkids, and I came into their lives at, I think, challenging ages. My stepdaughter was, I think, getting ready to turn 3, and her brother was 8. And I knew that it was just going to be easier as they got older. And I had somebody tell me, oh, no, ma'am, it gets 10 times worse as they get older. And I remember thinking, maybe for you, I swear to God, I remember thinking maybe for you, but I don't think that's going to be the case with me. And it has, and that has not been the case. It has gotten a whole lot easier as they have gotten older. And it's because I am better with dealing with a teenager or an adult than I am with a small child. It's just who I am. It's like I'm not cut out to work all day long and be exhausted and then play pretend and act like that I'm not tired and play games. And that's enough to drive me crazy.
Same.
Yeah. And so I love what you said. I'll close on this note. I love what you said. It's okay to not love it. And I've heard women say that too. And I'm like, bullshit. I don't know if you're lying to yourself or you feel like you got to convince me, but I'm not buying it. I could just feel I'm not buying it. And you're right. You can't love anything that feels like torture. And I think just giving yourself permission to feel like that would be a game changer.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was badass. That was
Thank you.
badass. And because I don't have any biological kids of my own, I was kind of stumbling around of how to ask the question because it's not like I can 1,000% relate to that. But that was the most perfect answer that I can think of anybody could have given. So bravo on that.
Thank
That was
you.
great. Yeah.
I've had many years to think about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
It's been a lot.
Yeah. Well, I've wanted to talk to you for a long time, and I'm glad that we were able to make today work. I appreciate it so much. So much.
Me too.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you for being here. And I'll try and find that video where they're trying to figure out if I'm AI.
Yeah. And I'll look for it too. But yeah, if you find it before I do, I would love if you would send it to me.
I will. It's hysterical. Yes. Well, thank you so much, Amber. I'll be talking to you soon.
All right. Thank you, Paula.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
The Thought Snob Podcast with Paula Swope has been brought to you by Thought Snob Media in association with Special Purpose Studios. All production, mixing, and sound engineering by me, Will Swope. We hope you've enjoyed this podcast. Please take a few seconds to give us 5 stars and leave a review. See you on the next Thought Snob Podcast with Paula Swope.